Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a new episode of Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim, where we cover The Mandalorian from a sort of meta perspective, including connotative meaning, the genre-specific parallels, as well as with a fairy tale / mythic lens, especially the symbolic kind. And with me to cover Chapter 6, The Prisoner, is Alex Kane.
Hey, what's up? Welcome back.
I cannot believe that we have done this. Well, now getting into our 6th time.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, the show just keeps trucking along, and this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. I'm so glad I decided to cover this show specifically and do a very solid segment for each episode, because this show keeps on giving. I tweeted out earlier today, me with every episode, watches the new episode. I'm like, this episode was everything. That's literally my reaction with everything. They put so much love into the show, the music, just the prop design, even the costuming, the visual effects. It does not feel like a television show.
Yeah, no, it's 38-minute feature films or something. It's a gift.
Yeah, and this episode was actually slightly longer, and I want to get into the recap of the episode in just a little moment, but just as a reminder, make sure to subscribe on your app of choice, as well as you can do that on YouTube if you want to keep up with everything coming out from What the Force and this segment specifically. As we're getting into the Rise of Skywalker, I think it's going to be really important to do that. Okay, so because we are 3/4 of the way through The Mandalorian Season 1, I actually wanted to do a check-in and kind of look back and be like, okay, what have we got here so far? How has this series kind of been developing for us as viewers, and is it doing what it needs to do? Alex?
It's been fun seeing how much it's focused on individual characters and kind of not dwelling so much on the galaxy at large. We're on episode 6, and we just got our first real glimpse of organized New Republic politics and this idea that there's a government out there in the galaxy, trying to repair things, in the years after Return of the Jedi and the whole fall of the Empire and whatnot. And, the Empire is still sort of this phantom specter that in every corner of these episodes, as we sort of get who the bad guys are and what the sort of dangers are. Things haven't changed all that much necessarily. And I think the first 3 episodes, they had a sort of specific feel to them, a very, Jon Favreau feel, very exciting. And then sort of beginning on episode 4 and going on to 5 and 6, it started to get really eclectic and kind of you just don't know what the next episode is going to bring anymore. And for some people that might throw them off, but it's really exciting. I think that we had sort of the 7 Samurai homage on a very lush green planet with, meeting these new female characters that everybody's excited about. Loved that episode. That's probably my second favorite. Then we had the very George Lucas, weird return to Tatooine that had a lot of symbolic character stuff going on. And now we get sort of the heist prison break kind of story. You can definitely tell that director Rick Famuyiwa is back, with his sort of amazing gritty Western style that we saw in episode 2, even though Baby Yoda adds a lot of twists to that. Yeah, it's been exciting. I think that the directors they've chosen and the writers they've chosen have been really potent voices, and I'm just always excited what the next episode's going to bring. It's starting to feel slightly more like a continuous story now that we ended on a cliffhanger last week, and then this week they're no, you're gonna have to wait for that cliffhanger. So it's exciting. It feels so Star Wars, and it's just, if all we had was the Mandalorian right now and we didn't have Fallen Order in episode 9, I think I'd still be super psyched on a weekly basis to be obsessing about Star Wars. So yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like this is just pure Star Wars, and they've really learned a lot from the sequel trilogy storytelling to, especially amp up the symbolism specifically. So is a mini hero's journey. Every episode has a journey into the adventure, into the wild, into the self, into understanding yourself better, and then bringing back that information into the whole and learning from it. And what's really, really fascinating is I was trying to be like, what is significant about the Razor's crest? Like, why is this the name? Why is this the ship's name? You know, and my friend Josh Johnson, who has been on What the Force before, but also like helps me kind of with some, especially Joseph Campbell stuff, actually has a Joseph Campbell answer. And I want to actually play that right now, just because I'm going to talk about it more later on. But it's really important to understand the through line of our hero, Knight in Shining Armor, his journey specifically throughout the whole season so far. And then I want to talk about the individual episodes and how they align to the genre-specific American monomyth that they purported to speak to in the beginning. So let me just share out.
Well, the next trial of our friend Lancelot was what is known as the Sword Bridge. This is a bridge across a roaring torrent that is of a sword, and he has to go across with bare hands and feet on the sharp edge of a sword. Perhaps you know the novel by Somerset Maugham, The Razor's Edge. This is a motif from, I think it's the Kena Upanishad. Any trip along your own path is a razor's edge. It really is. Nobody's done it before. And it's so easy, particularly if what you're following is your bliss, is your passion. It's so easy to tip over and fall into a torrent of passion that sweeps you away. This is a real lesson.
Just a very short clip.
Fascinating. I mean, it seems like one of those things that should have been a little more obvious in retrospect, the Razor's Edge. You know, I think that was even like a title of a Star Wars novel in the Legends era, I want to say. I could be wrong about that. You know, one of the sort of last Legends novels that came out, I want to say. It's interesting that he's sort of describing the way The Mandalorian as a series feels, right? Like this sort of, you know, it's like he has a sort of amount of freedom to kind of, like in the Western or what have you, the crime epic, you know, these guys, these sort of anti-hero figures they're trying to gain their freedom through various means, you know, various gold, children, women, what have you. They're trying to escape their past and their criminal ways or their sort of anti-hero ways, the bounty hunter life. I mean, the Mando, you know, he does what he feels like doing. It seems like we start this episode off, you know, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but he's always working because he wants to work, he needs to work, whatever. He's got like this sort of spiritual quest that he's on, but it never feels like this episode is happening now because of a specific reason that he needs it to be. It's more like it's happening, and then from there we have like the sort of thematic stuff flowing out from that, where, you know, it's like it's about his character.
He's like on a journey. He's on his knife bridge, and he runs into the ogre that's blocking his path, or the trial that he has to face, or something waylays him. It is, things happen to him on this journey. It's really very interesting. And how this aligns to the American monomyth is that each of these chapters ends up functioning like a Western in and of themselves. The stranger enters the scene, you know, helps the village, solves the problem, joins the crew, and then leaves, rides off into the sunset. What's really interesting is that, you know, the original kind of Western people were knights or samurai or whatever. And we know that our Mandalorian is seeking his sigil, his crest. This is, the ship is named, you know, my journeys, like end goal is to find my truth, my name, my symbol, the Razor Crest. He named his mode of transportation the culmination of his journey and like purposes.
Interesting. Yeah.
So cool.
Makes me think of the episode 9 cast has been using that phrase whenever they allude to the theme of redemption. They always they use this phrase like actions speaking louder than words. And of course we have that character Quill from the early episodes who, you know, talked about Mandalorians as being, you know, I've read the stories, like these are mythic figures from a storybook. And so the episodes being called chapters and each one having kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end in itself is very kind of, it all fits that sort of, that's
it feels very fairy tale. I do not, like we've said it from the beginning. What were we covering? Like, this is what we're covering. This is Star Wars. And I'm just so glad that we're getting it. I would like to dig into the meta plot a little bit more, understanding a little bit more, but we actually did get a lot in this episode from a meta plot perspective, even though it wasn't like directly related to, say, the bad guy that appeared at the end of the last episode. Who knows who that is or whatever. We didn't get answers, but it seems like maybe the last 2 episodes will be telling us more about that stuff, you know? And it seems like they're going to finish out the season with like, you know, what this all meant. They really did a lot of setup in this season, I think, like especially establishing who the Mandalorian is and what he's all about and what this journey is all about. Okay. That all being said, I think we love it. So let's head on to our Chapter 6, The Prisoner recap.
Sure. Okay. And this is excerpted from my usatoday.com recap. So I just want to like cite myself there so that I'm not committing self-plagiarism. Okay. So this week's Mandalorian is light on Baby Yoda moments, but heavy on incredible cameos. In Chapter 6, directed by Rick Famuyiwa and written by Famuyiwa and Christopher Yost, Mando joins a ragtag crew of mercenaries to bust one of their cohorts out of a New Republic prison. Looking for work, as he's wont to do in this show, the Mandalorian hits up an old pal named Ron, Mark Boone Jr., who needs Mando's ship, the Razor Crest, to board a maximum security prison ship. Accompanying the Mandalorian on his jailbreak mission are Zero, a droid voiced by the IT crowd's Richard Ayoade, Mayfeld, Bill Burr, a devilish Deveronian named Berg, played by Clancy Brown, and Xi'an, Natalia Tena, an old Twi'lek flame of Mando's. In transit to the job, the mercs tease Mando about his dark past, his unwillingness to remove his helmet, and even taunt him about their sudden discovery of Baby Yoda, who spends a majority of the episode hiding in the starship equivalent of a broom closet. Once they're aboard the New Republic ship, Berg blasts a chirping mouse droid, alerting the supposedly all-droid crew, who come marching in and open fire. Mando takes the guards unawares, dispatching them with a mix of hand-to-hand combat and minimal blaster fire. Inside the starship's control room, a lone human captain, Devon, played by Matt Lanter from the Clone Wars, threatens to send out a distress signal if the mercs decide to hurt him. Mando stops the others from blasting him immediately, but Xi'an, growing impatient, throws a knife into his neck. His death causes the distress beacon to go out. When they reach the target's cell, the prisoner within turns out to be Xi'an's brother, Quinn, Ismael Cruz Cordova. Funny, he says, the man who left me behind is now my savior, implying that the Mandalorian is in fact the reason he's been locked away. With their prize freed and ready to take off, Berg knocks Mando into the now empty cell, and the team heads for the Razor Crest. To escape, Mando lassos one of the remaining patrol droids and uses its arm as a key to unlock the door. An elaborate game of cat and mouse ensues, with our hero using cunning and non-lethal traps to best Mayfeld, Xi'an, and Berg one by one.
Yup. And return back with Quinn in hand.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. This episode, I would say actually, I saw a lot of divisiveness online.
Oh, yeah.
Some people like really loved it and some people like hated it. And actually like went so far to say like, let's just not talk about it. Like I was surprised. But this episode was so good on a meta perspective, which this whole series is turning out to be more and more like The Last Jedi than anyone would have guessed, I suppose. Just because of how symbolic and interesting and psychological it is. So I wanted to dig in a little bit into the characters themselves and kind of talk about each of them and how we felt about them before really digging into especially the genre and the symbolism and sort of mythological stuff happening. But like Armando, he just kind of shows up and is like, yep, I guess I'm here now.
I mean, yeah.
he just kind of shows up and like it is absolutely bizarro. Like he's like, I guess I gotta do this. Like when he connects with Ran doesn't seem to care. Like Ran has this no questions asked policy. I love that it's like a policy. Like it's very heist, fixer, it felt right, for him to say, yeah, no questions asked, And then like Mando's like, the ship's not in the deal, like he's very protective of the ship, which is really interesting. We learned a little bit about that. What did you think of like Mando in this episode?
We had talked previously, probably in like the last episode, about how, we keep expecting sort of cracks in his armor to show and for him to kind of start screwing up a little bit and to kind of, for him to go on this sort of, sort of like darker turn on his journey where he starts screwing up a little bit. And I feel like this is the first episode where we get hints that he's not all that we believe him to be, maybe. We have this foil in Xi'an who, she kind of alludes to whatever dark deeds are in his past and how, he wasn't always like this heroic, Daddy Mando that we've come to know and love. Which is cool. That's a very like sort of Star Wars thing to happen. It's very Darth Revan, which is in turn very, very, Kylo Ren, very Anakin Skywalker in reverse, whatever. It's a very Star Wars turn to say this heroic knight in shining armor. He's got some dark shadow to him. And we also saw him like at his most vulnerable. Bill Burr's kind of prickly chip on his shoulder. I wasn't a stormtrooper, all right, wise ass. He's a very prickly character. And we see him pick up Yoda, baby Yoda rather, and kind of like threaten him vaguely by implication because he like dares to pick up the child and then like he drops him and there's a lot of like teasing and kind of, he almost says like, I might take this kid from you is like kind of what he says in a certain, he kind of says like, pets, I was never really a pet guy, but I don't know, maybe I changed my mind and then he picks up baby Yoda, kind of implying that I'm going to take this thing,
So I have a Carl Jung quote for this. So when we talk about Mayfield, we talk about Xi'an, we talk about Berg, we talk about Zero, we talk about Quinn. They are all uniquely irritating, right? Each of them is kind of irritating to our Mandalorian and to us. Like they grate on us specifically in different ways. And like, so I'm going to say this quote and I'm going to bring it back when we get into the symbolic stuff. But I think it's really important that you're calling this out, that it's almost like every one of these characters like rubs the Mandalorian the wrong way. So everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding about ourselves. So and that's going to come into play when we talk about kind of what's going on from a symbolic perspective in this episode. Mayfield specifically, like, almost challenging him in the specific ways he does, like, almost from a, I'm worth more than you kind of way. And Berg is like, I'm physically stronger than you.
Tiny.
And yeah, tiny. And Xi'an from a, I'm crazier. And I like to murder people more than you. Like, we enjoy this, right, Mando? You enjoy this. Very challenging to him, right? We have Zero, who's like, I'm literally a better pilot than you, right? I'm better than you because I'm a droid. And oh, yeah, you hate droids. And Quinn from a, like, you betrayed me, you betrayer.
Yeah.
Perspective. Like, each of these characters in this 5 people that are around him specifically irritate him and call to things that, you know, explore or speak to him from a deep psychological place. I love that Berg was played by Clancy Brown. I literally lost my, like, I was eating and I like dropped my food. Like I was watching the episode first thing in the morning and I like just like was so excited I screamed and my son was like, "What are you doing, Mom?" I'm like, so excited. It's Clancy Brown. I love it when he shows up in shows. I love it when I hear his voice. His voice is very recognizable. And the fact that he actually got to be like in costume in this cool makeup and like that specific, I don't know what kind of race that is, but they were in the original cantina scene in A New Hope, right?
Deveronian, yep.
Deveronian. Look at me having a Star Wars podcast. But we got so many interesting like characters in this, you know, like Cheyenne being a Twi'lek who had the teeth, had the nails, had the Leku, like it was cool to see them. And we got Mayfield, who ex-Imperial, didn't want to be called a stormtrooper, like had all of that kind of attitude about him, all about his reputation. That too seemed very purposeful. What did you think of our 5?
Like Clancy Brown, same. Like when he shows up in something, I'm like, oh, you know, like I grew up obsessed with The Shawshank Redemption, and I grew up obsessed with SpongeBob SquarePants, which are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And that man, he is very talented. I love that guy. Anytime, you know, a lot of people, you know, I'm a big like Kylo fan, Rey, you know, Finn, Obi-Wan. I like the main characters that everyone loves, but I don't have like that sort of that obscure Constable Zuvio character to obsess about until I think I saw this episode, and I was like, the Deveronian, you know, thief played by Clancy Brown. Like, thank God. Berg, I just love him so much. And yeah, I could go on and on, but we'll have more to say later. But yeah, I loved him. And then of course, the Twi'lek, Cheyenne, she had sort of like a vampire thing going on with the fangs and the hissing, which I don't know, like that really stood out to me because she just had kind of her own sort of vibe going, which we can talk about what that means.
She was scary female.
Yeah, she was kind of like scary temptress, sort of like, I almost had...
She was high on the crazy hot scale.
Yeah, she had like this rock and roll vibe, which we've got like the horned... the devil, the satanic figure that we'll talk about later, but she was also very rock and roll, like almost as if to say to Mando, like, I know that you're a freak like me kind of thing, like that she kept doing, you know, not to get too weird, but it was kind of like, you're super freaky like me, like don't try to hide it beneath this, you know, pristine glistening armor. I know what you really are, you freak, you know. And I don't know, she was really compelling. I liked that she was like lavender or purple, you know.
We're gonna go straight into what's going on with these guys, I think, because I really just want to talk about them, but I do want to acknowledge, like, you know, we have our, you know, former Anakin from Clone Wars, Matt Lanter, who's going to be returning in February as Anakin for the 7th season of Clone Wars, so I'm super looking forward to that. I love him as Anakin. He just like enhanced the character so much, and there's just a lot of interesting things to say about the squishy center of this interesting prison that he ended up being.
Yep.
And we also had Trapper Wolf, Jib Dodger, and Sash Ketter, the most Star Wars names in existence, are three of the awesome directors that we've had previously: Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, and our director of this episode, Rick Famuyiwa. Wow. It was like so interesting. And like, before I get like into the big like psychological stuff going on, didn't this feel like a D&D game where the DM had to deal with like 5 chaotic evil characters and one lawful good paladin.
Okay, so before I saw D&D stuff in your notes, where my head actually went with this episode when they're sort of in the prison was, I was like, this is Knights of the Old Republic, the video game, which there's a prison break sequence in that video game. There's a lot of course, sections where you're just dungeon crawling through endless hallways that go this way and that, unlocking spherical bulkhead doors, and I was like, this is very KOTOR. We're getting like some real like meaty sort of KOTOR homage here. And then you said D&D. Well, I mean, KOTOR is D&D in the Star Wars universe, like full stop. So
it is,
that's kind of a fun little connection there that, you know, I didn't make until just now, but yeah, it has that feel of like when you're aboard the Leviathan and KOTOR and you know, one person has to kind of break everybody else out of the prison cells. This is exactly what this episode was.
Yeah. So. All the characters are kind of selfish in unique ways, except for like, and like I play D&D and, you know, it's really interesting because there's been kind of a conversation in the D&D world of moving away from kind of the, you know, 9 squared sort of alignments to, do you follow the laws or don't you? Or are you neutral? And are you selfish, evil, or selfless, good? Like literally changing the terminology to match what George Lucas has been talking about for 40 years. Isn't that interesting? Like, I love that idea. So, like, these are very selfish characters and they're chaotic. They don't believe in laws. They have their own way of doing things. And literally, like, the antithesis of each of them is the Mandalorian. Like, even Cheyenne, like, she like literally mocks the Mandalorian for this is the way. Like she says that. Like she's like, I know what your little thing is. I can needle my little knife into your guts. I know where to poke you. Each of them knows something like very secret about the Mandalorian that he keeps from everybody else. And each of them wants him to remove his mask so they can see who he truly is underneath. All right. We're dealing with significant Jungian psychology in this episode. Each of these archetypes that are in this party, this crew that are being put together to break this prisoner out of prison is an aspect of our Mandalorian's past and part of his collective shadow that he has collected over the years. And, you know, I actually went to my friend Ty because I was like trying to put these into words. And she's like, well, there's the one who kills for money. There's the one who kills for fun. There's the one that doesn't know how to do anything but kill. There's the one who's programmed to kill. And then there's the one who betrays.
Yeah.
Right? Each of these is an aspect of the darkness that our Mandalorian carries with him. And Xi'an actually carries a little bit of an interesting also part of him too. The anima version of his shadow too, because she talks about his sexuality and how, you know, he desires things that he has denied himself. So she also carries the anima aspects of his shadow. And shadow is a concept that Jung calls to, and also, you know, it has come from sort of different aspects of Freudian psychology and kind of pairs well with the id concept. But Robert Blythe specifically took what Jung said and spoke to it in a book called A Little Book on the Human Shadow, which I made Alex read. The shadow is the things that we don't want to look at about ourselves, the harmful things, the things that we've done in the past that we're ashamed of, the things that hurt us in the past and we don't want to deal with. We end up throwing it into almost like an imaginary garbage bag that we drag behind us that becomes our shadow. And the thing about the shadow is that when you ignore it, it grows. It becomes more powerful and becomes something that we see in others. So the Mandalorian sees these aspects of himself. And that is why, like to that quote that I said earlier from Carl Jung, that is why they are specifically very irritating to him and through extension us. And why the pure person in the middle of the maze is unlike them completely. We've talked about Shadow a little bit. You and I. Yeah. What do you think of that?
Gosh, I mean, he's, I feel like until this episode, you sort of just identify with him because he is sort of a blank slate. He's Zero, like the droid's called. He's sort of the stranger, the man with no name who comes, rolling in from out of town and does all these heroic things, which are great and we give him credit for and we sympathize with him for. But this episode is sort of the moment where the story is like, oh, by the way, we showed you that he was orphaned, that he's a victim, that he was taken in by this culture that he loves and has kind of devoted himself to in sort of a spiritual way. But there's more to his story. He's lived like for decades and you don't know everything. And she says something about, did he tell you about the job on insert planet name, whatever she says, like Alacor 3 or something. I don't know what the hell the planet's name was, but this idea that wherever Ben Solo ends up, whether he annihilates the Resistance or ends up a Jedi Master, you can't, no matter what, he's still the sort of scared kid who stabbed his father in the heart at one point, and so that's sort of that's the journey of our lives, right? Is that, at some point we kind of, we screw up and we have like a hard lesson to learn about, I probably shouldn't have killed my dad on that bridge on the circular base. My bad. I do apologize for that, Ray. I realize you were fond of that guy. I didn't hate him either. That kind of thing.
So our Mandalorian is literally unpacking parts of himself and looking at them, things that he has never unpacked, right? The fact that he, did what he had to do on that previous planet. The fact that he is basically considered to be like this heavy muscle guy who, is probably quite scary and intimidating. He is also, the guy who takes money to do and kill and do awful things. He is also this very mechanical metal man, like Zero, like Blank, like he is a Mandalorian. He doesn't even have a name. He isn't even a person. He identifies with each of these people, including the betrayer who he rescues from the prison and ends up getting trapped in the prison. He himself is a betrayer of the guild and the promises that he has made, this code. This episode shows a reflection of each of these people. Weapons are my religion. Well, didn't you enjoy killing all those people then? I saw you there. Yeah. I saw what you did. Didn't you enjoy it? Each of these characters specifically wants to see who he truly is. They're challenging him by way of the shadow. They represent these darker aspects of himself that he doesn't want to see and he doesn't want to confront because he's trying to change. But to truthfully change, you have to understand all of these aspects of yourself and then take them forward, know who they are, and then take them back into yourself.
Yeah. And Xi'an's line about, I know who you really are, of course, is like an ironic callback to Solo, where Kira, whose name is also 4 letters and also has an apostrophe in the middle of it, by the way. She says to Han, I know what you really are. You're the good guy. And of course, Xi'an is implying that the Mando is not the good guy. That's a very sort of Star Wars yin and yang move for the story group to make, or the brain trust to make, to say, it's all one big machine partner, you know, good guys, bad guys, made up words, as DJ would say, a very Rian Johnson thing that he's gotten a lot of flack for because he dared to hold up the Jedi Order and Luke Skywalker and say, you know, actually institutions and philosophies are made up by human beings, and human beings can mess up,
fall, fail. Yeah.
And it's really about the next step, right? And it's really about what, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And like to our transportation, the Razor Crest. There's this great line where they comment on how they need this journey. Why? Because it is a special ship that has never been impounded by either the Imperials or the Rebels. It walks the line in between.
Interesting. So
this is specifically a call to the third way or the middle path, which is a Zen Buddhism concept, and where I specifically think we're going to end up post-Tross. And I've been talking about it for a really long time. It is, you know, out beyond right and wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there. It is following your bliss along the razor's edge. You find your own journey. That is the key to understanding your place amongst good and evil. Yeah. It is your own journey into the self. And this whole episode is a journey into the self. So he gets his whole crew together, which are all aspects of his own psychology. So good job. They find teasing Mando with, you know, Zero piloting the ship, discovering a version of the self that is hidden, right? The secret of the self with the coded message. He finds the communication with Griff kind of throughout the episode, which is really interesting. But he's trying to hide his self beneath his mask, just like he's trying to hide his true self, his inner child, the actual child, our baby Yoda, beneath that door. Right, in the broom closet, you said, but I think it's like the sleeping quarters or whatever. What has become Baby Yoda's room? And eventually, they managed to, you know, open up the door, take off the mask, take off his persona, the mask that he hides his true squishy self from the world, and they literally are like dismantling it, just like Shadow does. Shadow irritates who the self is. It calls into question, you know, everything that you hold dear.
Yeah.
all aboard our razor's edge. our journey of, you know, on the knife's point or on the sword's edge.
Yeah, and somebody who is maybe more Buddhist than I and more, you know, educated about this topic can correct me or whatever. But, you know, as far as that whole middle path, that third way goes, you know, part of my understanding of that too is that there's this idea that you can live sort of an ascetic lifestyle as the Jedi sort of did, which is where you don't really, you know, indulge in your sort of baser human instincts. Like, you know, Xi'an was kind of implying that Mando should, be freaky and rock and roll like me. I'm a Twi'lek. You know, there's this idea in a certain Buddhist way of thinking where you have to break the rules in order to know where they are and to kind of to be a whole human being. Like if you only like go out in the woods and you know, eat berries and just wash your clothes in the river and don't have a carbon footprint or whatever, you know, you don't ever talk to anyone to hurt their feelings, you're not really like you're not a whole individual within the society, right? You're just kind of like you know, a vessel or something. I don't know, but there's this idea that you kind of have to like walk on the wild side, so to speak, or in order to get where you need to go, right? To kind of know like, okay, so I crossed the line and like, I don't want to be there again, but you have to go there. You have to like hit rock bottom, right? I don't know, to get to. Well,
so especially Alan Watts would talk about this in his lectures, and go listen to Alan Watts if you really, really want to dig and understand, especially the Force and how really a good frame and a lens to understand the Force and especially the morality within Star Wars. He would say that many gurus who are trying to teach, especially like kind of older traditional gurus, you need to go and give up everything. So you go from a world of, seeking pleasure and hedonism in a way, like the Xians of the world, and you're trying to understand what it means to be selfless. And so you go and you give up all your worldly possessions, and you go and you meditate in the wilderness, and you're like doing exactly what you just said. But the thing that you end up learning is that by trying to avoid the darkness, by trying to avoid the suffering, trying to avoid it, you are doing your actions because you are afraid of what will become of you if you, give in. You've lost trust in yourself as a human. And Alan Watts would say that only people who are born Buddhas can actually be Buddhas. You can only walk your own path with what you're given. It is unrealistic of anyone to expect to be a perfect yogi or a perfect Buddha who is not born a Buddha.
Yeah.
So you have to understand the darkness within yourself, and you have to understand the light, and you have to attempt to do good, but understanding all of those aspects of yourself. That's the only way that you can walk along your own path to your bliss, is by knowing that these things exist about yourself. I'm sure it's quite easy for a Buddha to be all good all the time, a perfect born Buddha to be good all the time. But all of us are humans.
It's also a very Western idea to have kind of a fatalistic, unforgiving view of human nature too, right? Like there's this idea that once you stab Han Solo in the chest and kill him, you're just you're canceled, you're hashtag canceled. And, that's not very useful, right? Like if we, in Western culture, we are kind of bloodthirsty, and once somebody commits an act, we want their head on a spike, and that's what's going to make us feel better. We want institutionalized revenge. We want the death penalty. We love that in Western culture. Okay. But it's sort of Eastern culture, which is, arguably what Star Wars is trying to introduce. Maybe not. Maybe we're not supposed to say that, but, there's this idea of in Africa, there was the Rwandan genocide, and these sort of tribal councils that were held that they practice institutionalized forgiveness, rituals of two tribes coming together who had committed an act of genocide against the other one, begging for forgiveness, and the other tribe then ritualistically forgave them. And it's this beautiful thing that was documented. There's this idea that, forgiveness is a touchy subject, and on an individual level, people can do whatever they want, but as a society that wants to, move forward and not just, do the whole genocide fascism thing over and over, and war and bloodshed, at some point you have to kind of move forward, and to do that is you have to pull the shago out of the bag, right?
Is finding peace with the darkness that has happened, in our history, because there's always been darkness.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting that these themes are coming out so close to the rise of Skywalker. Like
Robert Bly says in that book, that, or maybe one of the people he's interviewing, I can't remember, but in the book, the little book on the human shadow, there's this idea that, even before colonists came to the United States and settled these lands, were people creating art in sort of contemporary America, whether or not they realize it or not, they're sort of engaging and interacting with this unconscious shadow of the nation and all the dark things that have taken place here. We're kind of, we have slavery, we have, what was done to the Native Americans, displacement and genocide and like kind of cultural, erasure or whatever you want to call it, all these terrible things that took place here, people in 2019 are making art and it's still grappling with that stuff. And, I think like good art kind of has to, right? So that's interesting.
Yeah. And we learned a little bit more about, the Mandalorian carries a lot of shadow. He carries the shadow of the fact that all of his people are dead. We now know that. Ran or it was Mayfield said that, like all of the Mandalorians are dead.
Yeah. When they're taunting him, it's kind of like this idea that.
Yeah, and we don't even know if he's actually a Mandalorian, right? Are these just traditions that are maybe carried on by a very few Mandalorians? We don't know. We literally do not know. It is so interesting, but it has opened up like a lot of questions. And, the Mandalorian and what happened to his parents and the trauma he carries with him about droids. He is probably afraid of them because of the trauma that he carried with him when he was a child. And so it's no surprise that one of these archetypes of his shadow is actually a droid. He has to deal with that at some point.
Yeah. I think Xi'an says like, tell me, Mando, do you still hate the machines or whatever? And I think he turns around and sees Zero for the first time, like at that moment, that kind of awkward, like, oh. And that's like, that's pretty interesting for Star Wars to kind of
directly symbolically show what is happening psychologically directly on screen. It is very Last Jedi. It is incredibly Last Jedi. That is exactly what happens, especially like in some of the scenes, the hand touch scene in the hut. Rey and Kylo are projecting on themselves their own insecurities, and you can see their shadows being projected on the walls. In the moment that Kylo faces down against Luke in Crate, like and he's like, projecting all of his hate to this person onto him, but Luke is literally a projection.
Yep.
They're getting way more symbolic. No, not even way more, because like Empire is very symbolic in so many ways. It's just, they're reinforcing these concepts and using visuals to even do it more, from a storytelling perspective. It's just really good. Let's just say it's just really good. Even Zero kind of looks like him. Like he's got like a shoulder thing. He's got like the front chassis that almost looks like Mandalorian's armor. His head is a little different, but like Zero looks like he's wearing Mandalorian's armor as a droid.
If your vision was blurry, if I take off my glasses and I'm like halfway blind, he's kind of got like a Vader design. His mouth and his eyes are very Vader.
Yeah. And like he's got like the shoulders and the almost chest piece. So this will tie into like Mandalorian is Vader.
Big time.
A little more as we get there. But okay, so their mission is to break a prisoner out, to be determined prisoner, old guy from his old crew. Okay, cool. Let's go. The Razor Crest flies in, Zero flies it in, and they, sync up with the ship, managing to jam the New Republic prison ship that is like out in the Outer Rim, I guess. They lock into it and a portal opens. It is literally a round portal. And portals, so like these like round circular things, mean it is a journey into the subconscious. And how do we know this? Because they enter the prison and it is a labyrinth. All of the hallways look the same.
And it's bright, pure white light for a long
maze.
time, like THX 1138, like the Mind prison, pure white light for a while.
It's also like the inside of Darth Vader's meditation chamber.
Yep.
We are entering the mind and the psychology of Vader. I love Star Wars so much. Crazy. Okay. So they go and they fight the droids. They fight the mechanical things that are basically roaming the hallways, trying to protect the squishy bits that are imprisoned inside. They get to the control room, and inside of the control room, and what one fascinating thing when they fight the original droids that are walking up the hallway, the shadows the crew doesn't help him. They want him to get hurt.
Oh, when they're sort of just observing him take on the droids one by one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
They're not helpful things.
Yeah.
These things.
The episode makes a point to say, like, hey, remember how he hates robots because the separatists battle droids that killed his parents? And then, the prison is crewed entirely by machines, with one exception. That's so deliberate.
Because when you go into yourself, you fight the things that you fear, right? So they go in, they get to the control room of the ship, and this was supposed to be only manned by droids. And we enter Matt Lanter, who is dressed like that.
Captain Antilles.
Like you said, like Captain Antilles, the guy who Vader literally chokes to death in A New Hope.
The first person Vader kills in cinematic history, basically, right?
Yes, and it is Anakin. Mm-hmm. Matt Lanter is Anakin, at least in the Clone Wars. Like, Anakin is in the middle of the maze.
It's like Star Wars is trying to eat its own shadow. Like this weird thing where, it's like, you know, if Vader strangles this guy and then we see that guy is Vader, it's, you know, it's sort of like Luke in the Dagobah cave cutting off Vader's head and inside is Luke's face. You know, it's like that sort of, you are the thing that you kill because that's just, you know, the Ouroboros of life. Life eats life and goes on and you'll be eaten too and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very like the snake eats its own tail situation.
It's bizarre. There's so many layers.
And so he's afraid. He's just this scared little kid. I think they even call him like kid. Like, he's just this scared Anakin kid in the middle of this crazy maze that's happening inside of Star Wars. So it always means more. And what ends up happening? The lady, Xi'an, ends up getting frustrated with the internal battle that is happening, the playing out between the good and the evil, trying to be selfless, trying to be selfish, trying to be like, no, I'm just going to kill him anyways, you know, and she just kills him. Really interesting. I need to digest this probably for years.
With a dagger, which, right, like concept artists suggested to George when he was making episode 3, like, what if we give Padme a dagger when she goes to Mustafar? You know, I mean, like, there's just so many layers here.
What if Padme went after Anakin with the dagger? What if she came prepared to the confrontation with the dagger? Yeah. I think we just saw that play out psychologically. If the whole world if the whole galaxy far, far away is actually just all inside of one thing, and it is all the story of Skywalker, which it is, we just saw Padme kill Anakin.
Yep.
I love Star Wars.
And there's this idea too with Vader and what Star Wars is as a story, right? It's the idea of the man, the person, the human being with a soul trying to navigate a world of systems and bureaucracies and machinery and empire, you know, like technology, you know, Death Star, you know, Alderaan is peaceful. We have no weapons. And the Death Star says, you know, pew, you know, how's that working out for you? You know, it's trying to be good in a universe that is cold and uncaring and where people can build the Death Star, you know, and people can build, you know, social media and all these like terrible, crazy things that, you know, break democracy and hand it over to, you know, Boris and Trump, you know, of the world. So technology can be bad. Yeah,
it asks all those questions, but it also can be good. It can also be saving. It can also be helpful. You know, like it constantly asks, you know, is it only bad because bad people use it? You know, or people who have selfish needs. Like, is power bad innately, or is power only bad in the, you know, people who are selfish? But you know, I just want to repeat, our Mandalorian is symbolically Vader, like on a weird post Return of the Jedi trip trying to figure out what he's all about. So when they land on the prison and they enter the prison, he is subconsciously going into himself. Mazes and prisons and labyrinths are the subconscious. He is going into himself to try to find the truth of who he is. And he finds a scared, innocent kid. And then he ends up becoming the prisoner himself inside of the prison. When they find Quinn, he is betrayed by the betrayer, who he betrayed, right? So that turnabout, that eat the snake thing, the snake eating its own tail, the continuous cycle of if you betray, you will be betrayed, right? So he is trapped within the prison. And then suddenly he is the monster within the labyrinth. He is the Minotaur within the labyrinth.
Chirrut says in Rogue One, there is more than one sort of prison. I sense that you carry yours wherever you go. And there are a lot of Rogue One callbacks in this episode, as are Solo callbacks. It's funny, the droids heavily resemble K2SO, who was an Imperial droid, yet these are New Republic droids. So there's, again, that idea that, one thing can easily be the other.
The more things change,
yes.
The more they stay the same. Right? Is there a difference between the dark side and the light? Like asking a lot of those questions, and in a really interesting way, we have the Vader scene from Rogue One. So he escapes from the prison, and he becomes the one-man army / horror movie. Like he is the monster in this maze. Like they're literally afraid of him.
It's very James Cameron's Aliens. When the aliens first arrive and start picking off the Marines that have been sent to kind of investigate that colony, there's a lot of use of heavy red lighting. And also, I believe they literally use a motion tracker with like 1970s looking, technology on it in this episode. So there's like a deliberate callback to when in Aliens, seeing these monstrous creatures come out of the air vents above them, the air ducts, and kind of, like Mando is doing that very thing where he's kind of like lurking above and crawling around.
There's literally a scene where you see the guy walk and you can see him looking down into the air vent down. He is the alien. He is the machine. He is the monster in the like armor. Like, oh man, this show.
Which we said episode 5 was Alien with Amy Sedaris' character, so naturally episode 6 is Aliens, the sequel, so it makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah exactly. The genre is used to reinforce the symbolism, and I think that people sort of might have been confused because they were expecting one thing going into it to be a simple heist, and it turned into a heist / prison breakout with crazy team dynamics that ended up becoming a one-man army / monster or slasher film where Mando doesn't kill any of them. But when you view it through a psychological lens of an internal journey of trying to sort out your own pieces of your psyche and put them in the right place, or at least try to deal with them, it ends up having the genre fit it and support it and uplift it. If you just roll with it, it makes so much sense. If you fight it, you're like, I was expecting one thing and it didn't turn out to be that way, then it's not going to be making any sense. But don't expect anything from Star Wars. Just experience it. Just feel what the story is saying to you. And it's going to be mind-blowingly awesome.
Yeah. In terms of the heist genre, it's funny. Like, a movie that means as much to me as Star Wars that I rewatch pretty constantly is 1995's Heat, directed by Michael Mann. And that's, it's a movie about heists, let's get a group together and steal stuff and gain our freedom and stop doing heists. But, just one more job, guys, just one more. But in those movies that fit that mold of the heist genre, you know, there's always the one guy who is the problem, you know, and they get rid of him or they don't trust him. You know, in the beginning of the movie, it's this guy, Wayne Grow, who, you know, they slam his head into the table in the diner and say, you know, take your cut and get the hell out of here. And it turns out he's like a serial murderer and he's bad news, and he comes back later to cause a lot of trouble. Then later in the movie, they have on their crew is Danny Trejo, the actor, who's like, he's sort of a character actor that's been in a bunch of crime dramas like Breaking Bad, and you know, he's Machete from the movie Machete, and he you know, he sort of is tortured until he rats him out. And so there's the idea that you know, in the heist genre, there's always that one person who's like a little bit shifty, or you know, sort of the odd man out that they don't fully trust. And this episode kind of turns that on its head, and Mando is kind of, in fact, maybe the one that they can't trust because they're all bad and he's good, you know, which is, you know, according to the moral lens of the show anyway, the sympathetic lens is with, you know, Mando. Yeah, we've got like the devil figure, you know, the Deveronian, you know, might at first glance, you know, you're like, well, that's the guy you don't want to trust. He, you know, he looks like Satan, but really it's Mando who turns on all of them, you know, by the end of it. So he's sort of, the, you know,
well, and he's the betrayer of all of them, and he ends up honoring the deal and bringing the betrayer home, Quinn. And he deals with each of these aspects, like each of these people, in almost the way that kind of beats them at their own game. Like each, you know, a member of this, you know, 5 aspects of himself, he like beats them at their own game. Like the big one is Berg, who like, he's like holding open he tries to squish him with the door, and then like he ends up like having a second door to like squish him even more. It's like, but the killer thing, the most amazing thing, is that he doesn't end up killing any of the people that originally came in on the journey with him. He imprisons them. He puts them where they belong, at least for now.
Yeah, it's sort of like he rats them out to the cops in sort of the, you know, the Michael Mann heist movie kind of, you know, way of putting it.
Yeah, like they're all like locked to the prison gates or whatever, and he leaves. And even though he leaves, he still rats out Quinn to the cops.
Quinn's interesting because Robert Bly, he talks about the shadow being a heavy bag that we drag behind us, right? This image of the bag. And he's the one that Mando sort of hauls back to the space station hideout where Ron waits with his reward. So it's like the one thing we do know about Quinn, besides being the brother of Shian, which is interesting, is that, you know, he's a failure of Mando's in some respect. You know, he represents something that Mando did in his past to get the guy locked up in a cell, right? So, you know, he's very...
Yeah, and he had betrayed him, at least to Armando. He thinks he betrayed him.
Yeah.
You know? Like, he betrayed him for one reason or another, and the rest of the team that is doing this is holding that against him. That is his crime that he has committed already. But it reflects the betrayal that he has already committed to the guild, and that, to me, by bringing him back and not really dealing with him correctly, I think that means that it's still an aspect of his psyche that he still needs to deal with. He still needs to face that aspect of himself, like the betrayal of the guild and like what he is made for versus what he, you know, needs to do. Like, he still kind of needs to deal with all of these different aspects, especially like his anima, like his desire to be with a woman seems to still be there, like with Omura. And the fact that Shian was like teasing him about it is very significant, because he hasn't dealt with that. He hasn't dealt with his feelings. He hasn't dealt with kind of every assumption made about him in the episode was probably some sort of version of the truth from his own psyche.
Yeah, when Baby Yoda is discovered, Shian says something like, "Didn't figure you for the type. You know, maybe you've changed," or something like to that effect. Gotten soft, exactly.
You know, and it's like things that he's worried about himself even. It was just so awesome. Like I just love it. And in the end, you know, we end up getting that conversation with Baby Yoda sitting in Baby Yoda's like new little seat in the Razor Crest cockpit. And he's like, this was a bad idea.
Yeah, it was like he knew that going there was a bad idea, but he did it anyway. And then there's the little the symbolic callback of screwing off the knob from the lever and giving it to Baby Yoda to play with again. And Baby Yoda kind of looks at it and doesn't necessarily want to play with it anymore, I kind of want to say, which is interesting because it's a callback to episode 3 where we had all the fireworks and the betrayal of the guild. And then this episode starts with Ron saying, or Ran or whatever his name is, saying like, you know, I hear things, you know, I heard you're not so good with the guild anymore. And so it's almost like Baby Yoda's like looking at the knob like, oh, we should probably deal with this shadow, you know, we should probably, the guild.
Yeah, like you didn't deal with this correctly. You didn't deal with everything, right? He's letting him know, you know, things still need to happen.
Baby Yoda's like judging him, just sort of looking at him like tisk tisk.
I mean, Baby Yoda is his self, right? So, you know, like, yeah.
Oh, it's so much, yeah.
Oh, I love this show so much.
There's so much going on. I mean, you brought up D&D and how it felt like that. One of the things that I sort of dug up was that, you know, we had the horned character, you know, the Deveronian played by Clancy Brown, whose name is Berg, you know, Byron Hadley from Shawshank Redemption. So you know, an actor who's played a prison guard, you know, we're in a prison heist movie here, Prison Break. The figure of the devil as we see him in Rock and Roll, red skin, the horns, you know, that comes from mythology. The figure Baphomet, who was like worshipped by the Knights Templar, and that's like why they were supposedly burned at the stake, because it's like this satanic, you know, sort of anti, not very Jesus-like figure with like the, you know, that comes from yeah, I mean, like he's sort of a figure of the nightmare realm, like the sort of, you know, the red hallway, the, you know, the passion and the bloodshed or whatever. But actually the Baphomet character that from mythology is in D&D as well. So there's so many layers that you can peel back and talk about this stuff endlessly.
To me, as well, like I call to the boy with horns concept. Like he is the wildness within our young, like our Mandalorian. He is the wild child aspect, the pure, you know, masculinity in a way. And Ty Black did an amazing video on the boy with horns from a lens of Star Wars, and like how psychologically we try to push this like aspect of ourselves in especially young men down, like don't be so wild, stop jumping on things, etc. And like Berg, like it encompasses that just utterly. He is power, he is energy. Like he goes and faces the droids almost exactly the same way on the way out our Mandalorian does, and like just destroys them, but only with physical prowess. Like he is that aspect of the Mandalorian, and he even had that hate for the droids, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Bly, I mean, he specifically cites, I think, Jekyll and Hyde, you know, this idea that within every person is the either the sort of werewolf beast, you know, the Beauty and the Beast sort of figure, or the like I said, Shian is kind of vampiric. She kind of has like a vampire vibe going on, the sort of inner demon, where the wild things are, as Ty uses in her video. You know, there's this idea that when that hallway goes from white to red, you know, Mando's demeanor changes a little bit, and suddenly he's sort of the monster in the rafters or what have you. But it's fascinating stuff. And I mean, I don't think that Jekyll and Hyde was, you know, it's a book about just the unconscious, right? The sort of the baggage that we don't want to confront directly, and you know, it's going to come out one way or the other, and so it's healthy to deal with it.
Yeah, definitely read a little book on the Human Shadow if you have not, by Robert Bly. It's really, really interesting to understand, especially like how we treat others and like really how we treat others that like we don't get along with is probably because we're dealing with aspects of ourselves that we don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, the Chirrut quote from Rogue One, you know, it's like, it sort of frames, if you think of the episode through that quote, you know, it's sort of like reinforcing that this prison is metaphorical, and it's not just a ship that he happens to go to. It's because it's where he needs to go, because it's the thing that he's not dealt with yet, you know?
I think it's important to try to view Star Wars through at least 3 lenses. What is happening, surface, just the plot. Give me the plot, right? Just the straight up, hey, what's happening to our characters, etc. What is happening metatextually for our Mandalorian, for the characters within it, psychologically, symbolically, etc. What is it saying? And then what is it saying about the larger Star Wars universe in the big meta? Like, what is being said that plugs into the grand story of the one story? And I hope we got to that with this episode, talking all about the prisoner.
Yeah, we said a lot of stuff, but
yeah, we said a lot of stuff. Next week's episode is Chapter 7, directed by Deborah Chow, written by Jon Favreau. So we look forward to not knowing anybody's names again. I love you, John. Your episodes have been really good, but just please tell us people's names. We got to know everybody's names in this episode in text.
Yeah, organically.
That was good. Organically. So it says, an old rival extends an invitation for the Mandalorian to make peace. Do you think that he knows Moff Gideon?
When I read that and thought about it a little bit, I wanted to say, Carl Weathers is going to reach out to him. And we did see, Grief Karga, and we did see a hologram of him trying to, that Zero found in the sort of data bank of the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's sort of a casual hint that it could be him, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea that maybe he knows Moff Gideon even better. And of course, the fact that they didn't really even begin to address the sort of mysterious figure kneeling down at the end of episode 5 yet, that there's still a big question mark over Moff Gideon, over that dark figure. I would love it if they have history. I mean, we know that there's just a lot of things we don't know about the Mandalorian. That's sort of what this episode taught us, is that there's more to the Mandalorian than meets the eye, and Moff Gideon could be very interesting in that regard if that's the case.
I'm getting big OK Corral like vibes, like, this is all going to go down and it's going to end up like a shootout in the OK Corral, like people arming up on both sides, and then they suddenly have to meet up and like hash it out, the good versus the bad. And he's going to put a crew together of his own, of all of these good people that he's come across along on his journeys.
Yeah, like there's Quill, IG-11,
Cara Dune. I feel like he's going to collect his like posse.
Yeah.
By the end.
It feels like that. Yeah. It feels like we've been introduced to all these amazing characters, and then they kind of vanished. Werner Herzog, who I guess Star Wars name is just Werner Herzog, because we still don't have a name for him. So Werner Herzog is about as Star Wars as the name gets. So it's fine.
It's super Star Wars. So your name is Werner Herzog, but my name is Werner Herzog. Well, your name in Star Wars is Werner Herzog. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's what we're heading to. But I'm super excited for the last 2 chapters. The next one is coming out on Wednesday before The Rise of Skywalker. There's also supposed to be a preview for The Rise of Skywalker, or a clip included in the episode. Or like before or after, I don't know. That's the word on the street. So if you were trying to go in unspoiled, maybe wait until after The Rise of Skywalker to watch this episode. If not, and you're like on the hype train and are gobbling up all of the TV spots like me, feel free to go and watch it. You have been warned. And no questions asked. Well, Alex, thanks for walking through Chapter 6 with me. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at AlexJKane, Kane, or writing for various websites like PC Gamer.
Awesome. And as we continue to follow our bliss with the Mandalorian, we too will walk the razor's edge.
Indeed.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force: Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Jessica, Cassandra Corvid, Brad, Black-Eyed Lily, Anna Perez, Raylo Musings, and Jawa Dog. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or any of your other pod apps. It helps people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, at What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, whattheforce.ca. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.